Test. Test. Okay.
Yeah, it's recording, so you can go ahead and start.
Okay. Close the doors or anything?
Yeah, I closed those. I want to close the doors and you didn't start.
Okay. So, hi everyone. My name is Jeremy Brown, and I'll be presenting Microsoft Vulnerability Research, how to be a finder as a vendor. If you happen to work at a company that produces a lot of different software, like Microsoft, for example, you may be looking for bugs in your own code, but also code in other vendors' products as well. So I'm going to show you how to get a coordinated approach to fix bugs outside of your company, especially valuable if your products rely on other platforms as well. So David couldn't be here, but he is the manager of the MSVR program. Likes authentication, hates passwords. It just means he's working on some other ways to do authentication besides using passwords. I'm an MSVR contributor since 2011. Likes bugs, also likes making things more secure. So the agenda, we're going to talk about what is Microsoft Vulnerability Research. I know it's kind of an ambiguous name. Obviously it has to do with vulnerability research, but it's a little different program than Microsoft. The process, how it works, how things can go wrong, because everyone loves mistakes. A few real case examples, some of the cases we've been working on for vendors outside the company. One's LIBAVCODEC, VMWARE, and also BLACKBERRY. And some lessons we learned throughout the process. So what we're not covering, just to be clear, how Microsoft handles vulnerabilities in third-party software distributed with their products. We're talking about vulnerabilities that are in other vendors, not necessarily the ones that are included in our own products and suites. Any information about bugs that are in the queue, of course, and ethics or disclosure or which philosophy is the greatest. We all have our own opinions, so this is not about that. So what is MSVR? Started in 2008, founded by Katie Mazuris, announced at the Black Hat conference. MSRC cases and internal fines were affecting a lot of other vendors, and we needed a way to coordinate and get bugs fixed outside the company. So MSVR isn't MSRC. Everyone's probably familiar with the Microsoft Security Response Center. It obviously handles incidents and vulnerabilities affecting Microsoft products. So big difference, MSRC does Microsoft products, MSVR does anything but Microsoft products. It's also not the Microsoft bounty programs. We have a program that gives cash for defensive ideals, all the IE11 preview bugs, for example. Also not HackerOne, which is a great program for internet bug bounty, rewards friendly hackers who contribute to a more secure internet. Sponsored by Microsoft, Facebook, and a few other companies as well. So not those things. It is a program to help Microsoft employees report security vulnerabilities in third-party vendors. Third-party in this context meaning anyone but Microsoft. It's obviously an internal term. Provide assistance to finders, have people answer questions, ping the vendor, contact database with security contacts for a lot of companies, Adobe, BlackBerry, for example. And resources to define contacts that no one exists. Sometimes you find a bug and you don't have a security contact for anyone to send it to. And we have a database and relationship with a lot of other vendors to get the bug to the right place so we can get it fixed. Also, objectives of MSVR obviously prevent miscommunication. That seems to be a common theme around bug reporting. Keep everyone informed and provide transparency around the process. So there are MSVR advisories. So when a bug gets fixed, there's a dedicated web space to host all the information about the bugs. Each advisory gets credits to the researcher, whoever at Microsoft found the bug, unless you want to be anonymous. So why the focus on third party? Excuse me. The code that becomes the attack surface Microsoft uses. Of course, Windows, you have the platform, and it hosts a lot of third-party software. So it makes sense that even if we try to make Windows as secure as possible, the biggest hole is usually some third-party software that doesn't have a stringent security process as we try to achieve. Not just PC software, routers, firmware, and apps in the whole App Store process. Other vulnerabilities also affect Microsoft things, Microsoft DNS servers, SSL code. Obviously not the Heartbleed attack that recently happened, which was fortunately didn't affect us, but there are a lot of other OpenSSL. Anything that uses OpenSSL in their products was affected with the vulnerable versions. And also there's a lot of common coding and design flaws. A lot of things are not reinvented from scratch, so there's a lot of patterns there. Goals: ensure Microsoft acts towards others the way we'd like to behave towards us. It just means using coordinated vulnerability disclosure, not dropping 0 days. That's not so helpful when we're trying to fix our products. Definitely pushes everyone to make fixes out earlier, usually, but giving us time to at least hearing us out and letting us fix the bug is definitely good for the customers who are paying for it. Reproducible and interesting bugs, good repro and explanation. Definitely want to have a lot of details surrounding the vulnerabilities so we can fix them and coordinate with the third party. And help the finders out, make sure they get fixed, release the advisories. There is some public credit, of course, out there for it. Help secure the ecosystem. Like I said, Windows is a platform, all kinds of third-party code runs on it, so we're helping secure the ecosystem around Windows. And build a relationship with other vendors. So we can have these security contacts. We can have people that we know in the company that we can just send an email to and they'll actually respond to us. So who are the finders? A lot of people, obviously Microsoft employs a lot of security researchers and a lot of developers who work on security. Some people use it for hobby. Some people are using a particular set of software and they want to make sure that at least they meet the basic criteria for being somewhat secure and having less bugs than other things they would use. Sometimes it's product groups working extensively on a third-party product. Office finding Adobe Reader bugs when they're testing other functions that they may be implementing. Or product groups hitting one-off bugs. They're testing their own functionality, ends up going to another third-party software that we're using for some reason, and we end up hitting the bug there. So a lot of different people would be finding these bugs, and hence the need for coordination with other vendors. So the ones that are eligible, usually we use the critical, we use SDL bug bar. RCEs, of course, remote code execution are eligible. Something more serious, not necessarily cross-site scripting with no chance to steal any credentials. It's not really a security issue at that point. So we just focus on more of the actual vulnerabilities, things that are affecting Microsoft platform. So we wouldn't do iPhone apps, for example, they're not eligible. Of course, Windows Store apps and Windows Phone apps are. Anything you run on a Windows platform, we try to concentrate on getting bugs fixed in. Requirements. Obviously, employees must use a coordinated vulnerability disclosure, not responsible disclosure. There's no philosophical blockade on that. Must notify MSVR of all vulnerabilities they tend to report, things that they find. Of course, using company time. But you can also, third-party bugs found outside of company time and not using assets, such as their fuzzers, their internal source code auditing tools, can be reported through VulnBroker or bug bounty programs, for example. Employee can keep the money. So that's another good thing if you want to. People working on security as a hobby can also do it outside the company. So what's the process look like for MSVR? First step, report the vulnerability. MISFIRE, don't report the vulnerability. Pretty obvious. Ensure quality. So at MSVR, we want to make sure all the bug details, proof of concept, stack trace, anything relevant to fixing the bug, we want to get that information to the vendor so they can actually not have to spend a lot of time to research it themselves so they can quickly get it out as soon as possible. That's usually one of the things that the finders want anyways. And it won't ship if it doesn't. We'll go back and forth until it meets the quality bar. MISFIRE, not a bug. So log into Windows, type in 8. You might accidentally switch focus to your username field. We want to make sure these are actually security bugs we're reporting. So that we try to go into a lot of stringency on that as well when reporting. check for Microsoft impact. If it's a bug in, for example, OpenSSL is a great example, the new Heartbleed bug. We had people checking to see if there's any Microsoft products affected by it. If we have somebody that finds a bug in a vendor, we want to make sure all of our products are also, if they are vulnerable, coordinate the schedule for fixes. And if they're not, go ahead and just align fixes with the vendor. MISFIRE. For example, Microsoft researchers' online ad payments processing can be exploited for fraud, just like Bing's. Yeah, we want to check those things before release. So for reports of vulnerability, like I said, we have a security contact database, and if we don't have any contacts, we'll try hard to find one and ask them to encrypt the details so we can make sure we're communicating securely. So we don't have anyone snooping on the details before we get it fixed. MISFIRE. For this theoretical example, contact a vendor, they're like, well, what's your customer ID? We don't have a customer ID. We found a security problem. Well, we can't help you. Would you like to buy our product? We don't want to buy your product. We're trying to report a security vulnerability to you. Your mail is very important to us. We'll get back to you. It's definitely a sales purgatory example. And we've, theoretical, but definitely something you can run into. Monitor. Once we report the vulnerability, and we'll follow up with the company to track the fix through release, resolve any questions. Sometimes the vendor says, they say may not be vulnerable, may be vulnerable. Don't think it's a security bug. Maybe we ask the finder to route an exploit, for example, sometimes. If they have the capabilities to do that, definitely would make it better than a proof of concept. They may send a private fix to us to help the finder verify that they actually fixed the bug. And then keep everybody up to date with if there's going to be a blog post, conference presentations, for example, all that stuff. And another surprise, oh, we fixed that bug 6 months ago. We just never told you about it. Another thing we run into, that's why we have to keep constant communication with the vendor, make sure they actually do fix it and they tell us when they fix it so we can release advisory and tell everyone that it is fixed and they need to upgrade. So ship update. Vendor releases update. We hope they credit a researcher. If they don't, we'll try again. No credit. Finder's like, hey, fix this bug. And then you at least just say thanks or something. And then MSVR advisory. It's optional, but they usually come out. I think now we're starting towards another process where we're not releasing an advisory for every one of them, but maybe just a page that credits it, lists a CVE number, something like that. They typically, obviously gets released after the patch and purpose notify our customers. And they can also, the finder, can release their own advisory and coordination if they want to. So here's an example of what they used to look like. Like I said, we're trending towards just doing a shorter version now. But this is what the classic one looks like. Executive summary, mitigating factors, the function to notify people that there is a bug in this. A few details about what it is so they'll actually have an idea of how serious it is and if they need a patch. And then the people affected can go from there. So here's some case studies. I know I went pretty quick through the first part because I want to get to more of the interesting things. So there's 3 case studies like I mentioned before. One, LIBAVCODEC, the next VMWARE player, and the other is in BlackBerry print to go. These are real bugs that finders have reported to MSVR. And these are some of the technical details behind what they are, so you can understand what the process goes into finding them, whether it be fuzzing, whether it be just manually testing things, whether it be source code analysis, different ways our people find the bugs and why they get reported, how serious they are. So the first one, LIBAVCODEC. It's MSVR 12.017. Vulnerabilities in FFmpeg LIBAVCODEC could allow arbitrary code execution, basically possible RCE in LIBAVCODEC. The finder was fuzzing with fuzzing VLC with WMA files, and found a crash. So VLC uses LIBAVCODEC to do parsing of different AV file formats, and found a crash, looked promising, so went deeper into it. Obviously, it's easy to find the crash sometimes, but actually going into the details and figuring out if it's exploitable is another thing. So first step, I guess, being exploitable, says it's a write AV. So we're like, okay, that sounds interesting. If you ever do any memory corruption debugging, you say write AV, interesting stuff. So let's diff to see what the fuzzer changed and see what's the difference between our template file and the repro file that caused the crash. So if you can see in the middle, right through here, see the 01. This is the original file, the original.wma. 01 changed to 07 in the repro. So very small change, but that triggered the crash. So why did it trigger the crash? See 1 was changed to 7, but what is that word value? So first glance it may look like a byte, and how do I know it's a word yet? I'll tell you why. There's a program called Office, released by Microsoft. It's an Office visualization tool. It lets you look at you can apply certain templates to it, and you can figure out file formats based on the ones that it supports. So it's originally used in Office because we have all these complicated Office file formats, and when you're looking at specifically an exploit or a malware sample that's in the rtf.doc file, you just see a big blob of hex. You don't really know what's going on unless you apply some kind of structure to it. So Office can apply structure to it and apply these templates that tell you what the values actually mean in the file format. So there's a free version. You feel free to download it and try it out. It's not, like I said, it's not specifically for Office documents. It uses gut templates, which just describe a file format. So you can have a gut template, apply it to the file, and make parsing of them much easier and understanding what value actually changed according to the specification. So this is a screenshot of Office, and we can see Office tells us that it's a uint16, so unsigned 16-bit value. We call it a word for short. Number of channels. So I know it's hard to read, but number of channels is the word that was changed to 7 in the file. So we can also see it's a container. It's actually the ASF format, and ASF is a container for WMA files. We can search for number of channels. It's a 16-bit value. It's part of the WAV format X structure, and it's the number of audio channels for the content. Okay, sounds legit. If you have WMA files, there's going to be something that says number of channels in it at some point. So we changed it to 7, caused a crash. Also changed it to, the Finder changed it to 3 to 8, caused a crash. Changing it to 9, actually VLC displays an error dialog about how it doesn't support WMA2. That's a hint of, in WMA2, maybe 09 is one of the characteristics of WMA2 file format. You also find these things, these interesting details when you're debugging crashes. So I know you didn't see the stack trace, but in the stack trace there's a pop EBX and a call dword pointer at EBX plus 30. If you do any debugging at all, you can see, if you control anything around EBX, it's probably going to be exploitable. So here's what the Finder went through to find this crash in VLC. Not just found the crash, but actually go through the details of the vulnerability and found out that it did look promising, did look exploitable, and was worth submitting to the LIBAVCODEC team to get it fixed. So took the repro files in the original, so LIBAVCODEC can diff if they wish. Sent it to MSVR, and then they packaged them up, sent everything off to the vendor. And we ended up getting it patched back in May 2012. It took a few months to get it patched, or so I don't know the exact timeline. And we released an advisory a few months later. That was LIBAVCODEC. And this was the advisory for it. Next one, VMWARE. In VMWARE Player, this one's titled VMWARE OVF tool. So it's a RC in VMWARE Player that uses OVF tool. So kind of want to go step by step in this one, how the Finder might have found this. So first of all, when you install a VMware Player, you're thinking, okay, if you're looking at file formats at all, what does it support? So you got VMX, VMDK, OVF. I'm like, okay, I'm pretty familiar with VMX. pretty familiar with VMDK. What is OVF? So, open virtual machine format. An open, secure, portable, efficient, extensible file format for packaging, distribution, collections of virtual machines. There's a white paper link if you want to know more about OVF. So I didn't read, it's an XML-based file format for describing virtual machine data. Sounds promising, right? XML implies describing and consuming untrusted data, so looks like a good target. So how does VMware load OVF files? A lot of times there's going to be internal code that's parsing all these file formats. This one actually offloaded it to another binary. It was ovftool.exe. So upon loading an OVF file, executes the tool. Nearly the same as having the code in VMware Player, but then actually affect the original binary. So that's interesting. Anytime it executes another program anyways, you're kind of curious about that. You're like, well, first of all, it's executing a program. It could be a bug there. Second of all, that program is probably not going to have the same scrutiny applied to it than the original code. So that's always a good target. So what is OVF tool? Step 4. Well, it is a tool that imports and exports OVF files. So you can see it's a command line tool. Literally, VMware calls a command line tool to load OVF files and to import them and change them as needed into something it can run natively. Oh, step 5, find an interesting crash or unexpected behavior. XML file format. This is a partial paste of the proof of concept that's adjusted from the mutated file the fuzzer produced. You can see the XML SNS OVF envelope property is malformed. Instead of pointing to the schema, it's pointing to %F or %P, %P, %P. Now, at the time, the fuzzer might have changed to %N, which would more than likely cause a crash if it was trying to do that. But %P, for this example, gives us a nice failed open virtual machine with a bunch of pointers on the stack, perhaps. So, you can see there's a format string vulnerability, an OVF tool, which VMware, it might as well be a part of VMware because the VMware binary, because it's offloading. Every time you upload or import an OVF file, it's calling this tool. So it's just as good as having it in the actual VMware player.exe. And there's the advisory for that one. So the third example. This one's a little different. It was submitted as BlackBerry print-to-go authentication bypass. But what can we actually gain from this bug? That's the question. Keep in mind in the next few slides. So what is BlackBerry print-to-go? It allows you to print documents from your computer to your playbook. Install the software on your PC, and you can print anything as a PDF to your playbook. Take a file, print it, converts it to a PDF, sends it to your playbook. Simple enough. This is BlackBerry's demonstration of, oh, I got it here, also have it here, have it on all my devices. It's great. Great concept. So, in order to send documents to your playbook, you have to do the following. To log into the service using your BlackBerry ID, or using your credentials, encrypt the documents using your PIN-generate password from the Play-to-Go app on the playbook, and find a device using its PIN number. This, the first one, log into the service, we can bypass. The actual bug was, well, we thought at first, was we could bypass this. So, but what can we actually achieve from that? So, bypassing this means we won't have to log in, and we can theoretically print devices or print documents to a device. So here's the login screen. See, you have to, it looks pretty mandatory. You have to sign into BlackBerry to do this. But we found something interesting on port 1234, which is also interesting. They named that port. You open up the dialog, you try to print something, start a web browser, point it to localhost 1234/myservlet. The login dialog will immediately continue. It will go on to the next screen, bypassing authentication. Theory is it receives checks data on 1234, but the data's not, not the data's validity, at least well enough. So we get to this screen without ever having to log in. Well, without ever having to log in to bypass or to get past to the next dialog. So we get to this screen. We're not logged into BlackBerry at this point. We're able to set the PIN number, set all that, choose what to print to, or choose what to print to the playbook. And then we get this dialog. It's printing complete, but that was an error. So at this point, we really don't know what happened. We know that we didn't have to log in. And we didn't have a playbook. Well, the Finder didn't have a playbook to test at that point. So we're like, well, we bypassed the security dialog. We didn't have to log in. So this looks interesting, although we can't thoroughly test the situation. So we sent it to BlackBerry. Like I said, what can we bypass? BlackBerry concluded that while this was undesirable behavior, it wasn't a security issue. And their reason was printing does not succeed as a connector does not have a BlackBerry ID account and the token needed for printing. So even though we were able to bypass the dialog, which looked super promising, in the end, when they tested it with they tested it internally with a playbook, I assume, and the printing still would not, you could still not take documents and put them on an arbitrary playbook because it didn't have the token in the last dialog. When it failed, it doesn't tell you all these details. So we didn't know for sure as we submitted it to them. But they ended up testing it, and that's why, like I said, without a playbook on hand, it was tough to test. But it was better to submit anyways. Because in the end, at least they know about the scenario, and maybe they'll fix the undesirable behavior in the next release. But it turned out we couldn't gain much from bypassing that dialog because it didn't work in the end. So it's good to have successes. First two we succeeded to LIBAVCODEC and VMWARE, and we also have a good example of when it does look promising, but in the end it wasn't actually a security issue. So lessons learned through MSVR. At this point, you should know that you can run a third-party vulnerability coordination program if you have a software company. These are the things, while we've been running it, that we've learned. Vendors range greatly in their capacity, not necessarily coordinate with their size. Some development teams are very responsive, others not. Some big companies are effective, others mire you in bureaucracy. Setting limits is important. If you're pen testing the whole web and you send in 100 bugs to MSVR, we don't have that many people working there, so it's kind of hard to coordinate all these issues, especially if they're low severity bugs. So setting limits is important, but also if you find something super promising, we still want to try to get it to the vendor, like we did with BlackBerry. Also, kudos to BlackBerry security team. They were very professional handling this. We give employees a standard end-to-end process for getting bugs fixed. If you work at a software company, find a bug in a third-party vendor, if it's a small company, they may be like, well, just send it to them, get it fixed. So you're doing all the work. You have to do all these things, and if you have a program to coordinate all these things for you, when you can just package them up and send it out, it's much, much easier and much more effective getting things fixed. Pretty cheap to run, high, return on investment. Great for employee morale. For example, I do it more as a hobby at Microsoft. So I'm finding bugs, sending them in, and it's great for morale. I get to do my own research while I'm still doing my day-to-day work. So it's fun. Secure your ecosystem. It's definitely an important thing as well. Like the HackerOne bug bounty program has a bounty for the internet. Obviously, people care about the ecosystem, even the largest one, the internet. What we'd like to see when reporting vulnerabilities. This is directed towards more of the vendors. Clearly identify point of contact. I know that's hard when you have some turnover in companies, but having a security at email or some kind of external email that people can actually get a hold of you at, and you don't have to send it, you don't have to talk to tech support, that'd be great. They were just a direct, clearly identified point of contact. Encryption, always good. You don't want people snooping on your bug before you get it fixed. Also, a direct line to a person who understands security. Again, don't want to talk to tech support. Give me somebody who's writing the code, or at least handling people who write the code. Clear communication, acknowledgement would be great. You send an email out and they don't even acknowledge that you just told them they had a huge security bug in their product. That's not great for morale. Repro, Also, clear dates and release dates when things are going to be fixed, how will be credited, and closure. Things saying, thank you for reporting it. We'll look into this similar issues in the future, and hopefully they won't keep repeating the same mistakes as people have been for 20 years. Variant investigation. A lot of times you'll find a bug, and there's 20 other bugs. You just got to go down another path to find them. It'd be great to have some variant investigation at companies. And prompt fixes. We all love prompt fixes. So, that's the end of my talk. Any questions? Sir?
Most of the examples you gave were kind of like basic download that are known. How many MSVRs have you done that are kind of like in-house software?
So the question is, how many MSVR cases were enterprise software instead of mostly consumer software? Yeah. Well, there's a list on the website of all the cases. I would say that I know there's a few bugs in Cisco AnyConnect. Maybe that would be more enterprise software than VLC or something like that. It depends on, like I said, a lot of people do it for hobby. So, and of course, we have access to a lot of enterprise software at Microsoft. It just depends on what the target is that the person decides to go after, or on product teams what they're doing. So a lot of obviously product teams make Office, for example. So we're looking at a lot of consumer products as well. I would say there's definitely more consumer products that we look at than enterprise. But if you want to look at the MSVR archive, you can see a list of the ones. But I would say they're relatively low compared to the consumer products. Like I said, we don't just pick a bunch. It's more of like a hobby or just other things people can do outside their normal day-to-day activities. So it's usually not, okay, let's go, pick this enterprise software and find all the bugs in it. It's normally not how it works, at least with MSVR. Usually it's, okay, I'm working on this product, I found this bug in this third-party software, I need to report it. And a lot of times it happens to be consumer. So there's not like full engagements with this usually. It's more just, I have some spare time, I want to work on this. So the targets are picked definitely arbitrarily by anyone who wants to do security research. Any more questions? So you guys understood everything and good? All right, you can contact MSVR if you have any more questions after that. Definitely you can loop me in if you like. But thank you very much for listening. Sure.